Now I have like an entire rant, and I'm trying to push back against this idea of that there has to be a hard and fast rule of the number of keywords that are contained within the campaign. I'm calling bullcrap on that rule.
All right, and we are live. Extremely excited today because finally, after a lot of back and forth, we finally found some time to get together. We're joined by Bulk Sheets Queen, Amazon PPC expert, founder of Jungler, Elizabeth Green. You may have seen her on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and her own YouTube channel. And she has graciously taken her time to come on this channel and share her Amazon PPC wisdom, which I can promise you is extensive. So specifically today, we're going to be talking about how to properly scale your Amazon PPC advertising campaigns. And we'll see kind of all the other kind of gold nuggets I'll try to extract from Elizabeth today. So first, before we dive into all the value, if you'd like to just kind of give a little brief background about you, your experience with Amazon PPC and kind of Amazon sellers and brands.
Yeah. So hi, Elizabeth Green, co-founder along with my husband of Jungler. He is like the silent partner. He's the one who is much smarter at business than me. He always gives me like advice, you should be doing this. And I'm like, no, that's dumb. And then I'll implement it 3 months later when I realize he was right. But if you are looking for like the advertising, I definitely know way more than he does. So it works out. We've been doing this, I want to say it's like 4 years-ish at this point. And, you know, I've probably been in this space a little 4 to 5 years. Started out the classic, like you hear of a lot of other agency providers saying like, oh, this is something I can be super helpful with it. And people are asking questions. I happen to have the answers. And then of course that led to clients, and it's just been going ever since. So that's a hopefully succinct backstory.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and dive in. So scaling Amazon PPC campaigns. What is that exactly? When would a brand or kind of seller know when to start that process? And then what does that kind of look like? What are some like tactical steps that someone could take to kind of profitably scale their campaigns?
Yeah. That is like an insanely good question. And I think scaling is one of those numbers like strategy. You're like, okay, I know I need it, but like, what the heck is it? So I've actually been recently defining strategy as a hierarchy of priorities. So thinking of it as like, we only have so many hours a day. What is that we need to do? So think of scaling as in doing more. And that can be on a couple different levels. I actually had a question recently on scaling. And I was thinking of it like there's only certain ways you can scale, and you can infinitely scale, but to your point of, can you scale profitably? So that's really the question. And I am a huge fan of letting the data determine if you can scale. And then the other thing that you have to figure out is not just what is the data telling you, but what is your particular business goals. So you really have to keep in mind your things like your profit numbers as well as your cash flow. There's a lot of sellers who say like, oh, you know, I'm making great profits. Let me like absolutely blow up this product. And then they realize like, oh shoot, I don't have enough money for reorders. So if you're looking at aggressively scaling, you really need to take in everything as a whole, to your point, profit margins, as well as just what does your business look like? What kind of lead times do you have with your suppliers? Do you have enough cash? Is it possible if you start scaling and things like just really take off, can you get money in the terms of loans? Can you get good terms? Like you just want to look at all the above, and that's going to put you up in a much better position. Now, when we're talking about it on the ad side, there's really, I was thinking through it, I think there's only a couple ways you can, in essence, scale. And it is in the form of increasing your bids, increasing your budgets, budgets being on the budgets of your campaigns. You can expand into other ad types, and you can expand into other targeting types. So when it comes to scaling, you can look at things from a macro level and you can look at things from a micro level. And I think it's helpful to understand that when it comes to scaling, what you're really doing is, can I appear in more places, or can I appear more of the time on a specific search page? That's really all there is to it on a very base level. I actually have been trying to build out some internal trainings for like my team, and that's actually been very helpful. I started with how do shoppers actually interact with the ads? What does it look like from a search page perspective? From us as advertisers, we look at it from like bids and keywords, and we're trying to finesse all this stuff, but all the things we're trying to like adjust for are all things that if we look at it from say like the front end in shopper interactions, it's just, are we appearing more places on that search page? And are we appearing more of the time or higher up in search? Like, are we getting more visibility from something? So those are really the two things you're looking to affect. And again, when it comes to appearing in more places, that's expanding to additional targeting types, or ad types, excuse me. So sponsor brand, sponsor product, sponsor display. Or are we looking to do more of it? Meaning, are we increasing our bids? Are we, increasing the budgets because, our bids are eating up all of those budgets? There's other like smaller tweaks you can make. So maybe changing your campaign strategy. Maybe you're playing with placement adjustments. Those things I consider more incremental adjustments. Really main things are bids and budgets. And then actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there's a third one, which is not just scaling the individual searches that you're appearing on, but it's finding more potential searches you can appear on. So adding additional keywords into the mix.
Gotcha. No, that's actually a really great way of putting it that I love that you just said. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's kind of like vertical and horizontal. So like appearing in more places or appearing in the same places more times, both of which, right, more eyeballs strategically ultimately result in more sales. If you're on eyeballs for like completely irrelevant stuff, then obviously not. But yeah, okay. Do you see any one of those? So, for example, like you kind of mentioned, expanding into maybe like different kind of sponsored brands, sponsored display, or adding in more long tail keywords or even more keywords from search query performance or whatever that might be. Do you find like one of those kind of consistently that that's for those sellers who want to scale? Have you seen kind of across the board, it's like, okay, all of these sellers are like 70% of them are not doing this where probably they should be?
That's a really good question.
Like if one jumps out.
Yeah. I'm not sure if one particularly jumps out. Other than my thing is always what's going to be the easiest. So I don't know if you watch Alex Hormozi at all. He had an absolutely insane video he put out on him doing a presentation, and he was talking about more, better, new, and everybody wants to jump to the new. New for me is like launching into additional keywords would be the new. But the question is, can you make what you have better, and can you do more of it? Those are the easiest things. So I actually have a video I put out. Somebody asked me, okay, like I know I have to have goals and I know I have to have my ACOS goals. And I'm like, I understand these concepts, but how do I translate that into an actual ad strategy? Like what's the nuts and bolts of what I need to do? So I actually put out, it's more of a framework, but of kind of like how you can sort of think through that process and how you can get to the basics. But what I kind of ended up with at the end of that is this whole kind of trying to marry these two concepts of Alex's more, better, new, and the fact his point was more and better is much easier for you to do because you're already basing it on data versus new, you're in completely uncharted territory. So that actually made a lot of sense to me from an ads perspective because the thing is, if I can do more and better, so more and better would be more as in increasing budgets or bids, or better, maybe kind of fine tuning my campaigns, or maybe, kind of adjusting my bids in some other way, or better as in maybe adding negative keywords or correcting for things. Those things are stuff I can do today. So for instance, if I have a keyword that I've identified, I convert really well here. I'm looking at my placement data. I do really well top of search. And you know what? I have room in the budget to do this. I can instantly go in today, adjust that bid on that keyword, appear higher in top of search, and immediately influence sales for that product. That's something immediate that I could do. Or better, maybe this isn't working as well. Okay, it's a broader targeting type. Oh wait, there's this negative keyword that is sucking up much of the budget. You know what? If I eliminated this search placement, I could go in and increase my budgets. Or great one, I have a campaign with great keywords that is well underneath my ACOS targets, and it's running on a budget every day. maybe I could just go increase that budget. And immediately you're going to see the impact of that. And you're basing it on data that you can be very confident in. The problem with going out and finding new keywords, and a lot of times, even if you take the existing keywords and maybe move them into a new ad type, great practice to do. You're basing it on even less data, so there's even less certainty. And that is the whole point, is it makes more sense to really dig into what you have 100% certainty on versus trying to go out and find completely new things. Now, another great thing, if you're like, okay, so when it comes to scaling, there are two things that are going to kind of create resistance to just like infinitely scaling. One of those just being market demand. There are certain keywords you're like, oh my goodness, this is like, I cannot believe this ACoS. This is phenomenal. My cost per clicks, like it's great. But there's just only so many shopper searches on those pages. You can't, the one kind of not issue, but the concept that you should recognize is that with Amazon advertising, you don't create market demand. Maybe on other more like audience platforms, you can go out, you can bring more people into your audience. Amazon is the one that's actually driving what the audience is, and all we're looking to do is capture it. So there's only so much you can scale certain placements. Even if you put additional ad types, there's only so many people searching those pages. So that's going to kind of like cap how much you can sell or how much you can scale, say, a particular search page. The other thing that you obviously have to keep in mind, which is something that you mentioned in the beginning, is what are your profits? So really, when it comes to scaling ads, like I said, you can do bids and you can do budgets. Those are two kind of like the basic things. Budgets, possibly. If there's enough search volume and I'm running out of budget, then it makes sense. You know, if I increase the budget, as long as the search volume is there, I most likely can scale and still somewhat maintain the same profits that way. But when it comes to bidding, so if I want to scale it as in get more higher placements, I have to increase the bid, which increases my cost per clicks, which if my conversion rate at those points does not increase to meet the increase in my cost per click, I am going to see an increase in the ACoS. Now, in some times, if you're zooming out and looking from a more macro level on a product, if I increase, maybe my ACoS increases, that doesn't always 100% translate to an increase in the total ACoS numbers. So as long as your total sales rise at the level that your ad spend is rising, it's a division problem. Ad spend divided by total sales. And so as long as both of those numerator and denominator are going up at the same rate, you're still going to end up with the same calculations. So it's not always that you can't do it, but sometimes if you increase it, increasing cost per clicks isn't always going to mean that you're going to stay profitable. At some point, it will become unprofitable. And so at that point, that level of scale, while you potentially could increase that, you also have to take into account, like we were saying, like business metrics. Does it make sense profitably for you to do that?
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And there was a lot that you kind of threw out there. I know you're like giving so much value. So I'll try to kind of dissect it because there's a lot of really good points. One of them that I'm just kind of curious to your perspective on is, I know you mentioned kind of the macro and micro. Let's just say one of those macro metrics is tacos or total ACoS, or I don't know, people say it a few different ways. Kind of like looking at that as one of the higher level metrics. And kind of what you mentioned was very interesting. I know what a lot of sort of, Amazon SEO people will do when kind of analyzing overall, or one of the metrics they look at for kind of market share is looking at kind of total like keyword volume. So the number of keywords that you're ranking on page one multiplied by the search volume for those keywords. And I know it's kind of an estimate, and getting just a general like, hey, the similar competitor to yours gets a total of, this many thousand searches estimated per month, where you're getting X. And obviously there's different ways. It's not just PPC, then that gets into keywords and things like that in SEO. But what was very interesting that you mentioned is kind of at the keyword level for Amazon kind of ads, and looking at like, hey, could this keyword scale? Or maybe like you're already like, you're already top of search, you're already dominating, like there's just no other strong competitor, maybe a very unique product for this specific kind of like keyword. How do you kind of go about assessing on the keyword level, yes, there could be potential room for scaling of this keyword, or like you're pretty much maxed out here, or maybe even like you want to scale for a keyword. I see this with a lot of giftable products, like you want to rank for, gifts for mom or graduation gifts or gifts for boss or whatever. And there's other, not similar products, but there's other products that are ranking, and you try to rank and try to like drive, use PPC as a tool to drive ranking for that, or even to get direct sales, and it just doesn't, it just doesn't kind of go through. So now I'm kind of giving you a couple things. So, okay, the one thing is looking at the keyword level and kind of assessing scalability with that. Like, how would, me as a seller know that maybe these are the keywords where there's maybe some room to scale, and these ones maybe not room to scale, or maybe I shouldn't scale also, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. So I think that there's two ways sellers probably have questions on this. One is very easy to figure out, and that's from just a performance standpoint. So I'm not huge fans of like completely looking at ACoS in isolation. I actually have an entire video I stuck out. It was actually an internal training. One of my account managers was like, dude, this is a little bit much. You shouldn't share it. And I was like, no, I'm going to share it. So it goes through kind of how I think about each keyword as it relates to the total sales volume in an account. Meaning like how many sales is this thing driving in relation to like all the other ads we're doing for this product. So that's a great way to look at it. So if you see like a very high sales volume on something and your performance metrics are really good, and the volume is quite good on that keyword, well then that makes sense. You also want to take into account, say, your conversion rate numbers are going to be really good. But if you're getting high profitability, your cost per clicks are reasonable, and you're seeing high volumes, most likely that means your conversion rate's good as well. So those are pretty easy. Again, you're looking at it in terms of ACoS, and you're like, oh wait, great, this is like within reason of my targets. I'm getting really great volumes through here. Makes sense for me to push it. And then you just see, okay, what does that ACoS number translate out to be once I start pushing it? Is it more profitable? Is it less profitable? Do I see an increase in sales? Do I don't see an increase in sales? So on a lot of levels, like I'm talking about these, like, okay, assess individual keyword, and everyone's going to go out and think like, okay, great, I'm gonna have to build this great system that I'm gonna have to like track everything and like figure out all these things. You're naturally doing it if you have a really good bid adjustment system. So I would say don't overthink this. It's not a bad idea to really deeply analyze certain products. If you're trying to figure out, okay, I really want to drive sales for this, what is the best place for me to drive sales? It makes sense to do that deep analysis. But if you think you're going to take even 5 or 10 products, and we deal with like hundreds and thousands of products in an account, and try and do this like insanely granular micro level analysis, you're going to spend so much time that you're not really going to get actionable value out of it. So I would say just kind of assess through your natural bid cycles. And like I said, we take into account order volumes and, percentage of total sales volumes when we go through our bid adjustment. So that's kind of like baked into our system. So it's baked into our system to be able to scale these things.
Gotcha. So kind of like those 20% of keywords that may be accounting for like around 80% of total kind of sales.
Yep.
Those are obviously identified as these are important. So we want to make sure that, these like our focus, right? And I'm sure that's something Alex Hormozi and many others have kind of mentioned about the 80-20 rule. Is that something that you apply the kind of the 80-20 approach when looking at kind of these keywords to scale?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And like I said, you're going to naturally see it in the data. And if you're adjusting bids in any sort of reasonable capacity, so you'll probably say like, oh, wow, this keyword only got a couple sales, but you know what? The ACoS is like insanely great. Makes sense for me to increase the bid. So in some level, if you're making these assessments, you're kind of naturally scaling specific things. I think where like the deep analysis and really kind of diving into it comes into play is when you look at a product, you say, I really want to rank this product. Where do I have better conversion rates than my competitors? Where am I seeing good search volume? What makes sense for me to kind of not isolate, but identify or put somewhere, maybe even do manual bid adjustments where I'm going to kind of give more leeway to the ACoS numbers with the goal of, say, pushing sales and pushing ranking. That's where you kind of have to go outside of your basic system. But then again, in our system, what we've done is we've created ways that account managers can, say, input specific targets, keywords, campaigns, portfolio, whatever it is that they want to do that like very refined targeting on. And then they we've kind of put in ways that we could either, identify these as manual adjustment targets or give them a little bit more leeway in certain measures. But that's not something, you can absolutely do that within maybe even a lot of automation softwares, or, just kind of making notes in the account somewhere.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense. And I know you kind of, I think, briefly mentioned this, and I'm not trying to put any words in your mouth. I'm kind of dissecting a little bit. That for some of these keywords, kind of like, so number one, kind of doubling down on what's already working, kind of scaling that first before trying the new is a good approach, which totally makes sense and I agree with. And by the way, I'm a big Alex Hormozi fan as well. Overall, I think I follow him mostly on TikTok. So if you guys don't follow, you should totally follow him as well. He's great. So anyway, that's kind of number one. So with that, kind of 80-20 in a way, or at least looking at some of those keywords that are, contributing to, total sales, at least in a large percentage kind of combined together. So with those, I know there's some of this debate in the PPC community among other topics, but will you kind of identify some of those keywords and kind of isolate an exact match? I'm sure for some it depends, but is that a strategy that you use, like keyword isolation, or what is kind of your stance on that overall, especially for those particular keywords?
Yeah, so I like keyword isolation when we have it set up to. The other weird nuance to Amazon advertising in particular is that campaigns that have a history on them tend to perform better. So the one thing that we've noticed, if you're going to if something is performing and say it's in a campaign with 20 other targets and everything else, all the other 20 targets are performing, well then, providing unless that is creating issues, say with budget adjustments or things we can't scale the budgets because other targets are not performing as well, and then we have some issues, we'll most likely just manage it in its current state. The other good practice would be if you find those issues, what you can do is kind of keep whatever your best performing thing is and then take everything else out of that campaign, essentially pause it there and then go relaunch it somewhere else.
Gotcha. It's reverse, so keep what's working in that campaign that has history, take the poor performers and either just pause or get rid of them or kind of migrate those over to another. Oh, and by the way, I know we use some jargon here that because I'm familiar with PPC, so we use a keyword isolation. It can have different meanings, but let's say creating an exact match campaign that has one keyword, one campaign. And the reason for that, or kind of some of the theory, is to have more control over the budgets for that, as well as, especially with placement adjustments. That's at least, what we know. So that's kind of what I explaining what I meant by kind of keyword isolation. And with that, I know you also, I think, kind of touched on that for some of those, important keywords that are contributing to kind of total sales, maybe some of those get kind of migrated over or kind of however you deal with them based on previous kind of campaign structure actually I just thought of another question. Sorry, before I get to that question, that was the second question I had for you. I know you probably take on a lot of accounts and maybe the campaign structure is a bit messy, or especially with your specific kind of strategies and structures, need to kind of rework things a bit. If you had, let's say, the perfect, ideal, you're creating from scratch, and you're in charge of it and you can do whatever you want, how would you go about, and maybe this is opening a whole other can, so we don't have to go down that whole rabbit hole, but for these kind of, maybe how would you identify without sales data, if you'd be able to identify when the product's kind of going live, here's the keywords we should be watching out for. Let's say here's the 10 most similar competitors. They're all ranking for these keywords. So we definitely should, there's some data there. Obviously that's new. That's kind of a new product launch and brand new campaigns. Do you in general start off with more segmentation? Or do you kind of have maybe sets of 10 or 20 keywords in a campaign and then run the data and then segment it out later? Kind of what is your, if that makes sense, what is your overall approach when it comes to kind of new?
That's a good question. So I would prefer in the beginning more segmentation. Now I have an entire rant and I'm trying to push back against this idea of that there has to be a hard and fast rule of the number of keywords that are contained within the campaign. I'm calling bullcrap on that rule. Now
you heard it here first.
I'm going against a lot of people here and a lot of very good friends who I consider to be very good account managers and very good ad people. So there's a lot of good minds who agree with this rule. My rule is why the heck 5? Why? I am old enough in this industry to remember when everyone said no more than 100, and then they said 50, and then they said 20, and then they said 10, and now they said 5, and a lot of single keyword campaigns. Like, why? So and I think I have a video on this on our YouTube. I think it's called like single keyword campaigns, like question mark or something. And basically the logic, which is, again, I can get into a rant on this, so I don't want to like waste anyone's time. But the basic idea is that there are certain campaign structures where it is not getting impressions is somewhat expected. So for instance, like very low broad match campaigns, very low auto campaigns. Maybe we have certain keywords that are very like long tail keywords that we might get impressions, we might not. If I have 100 of those like single broad match keywords that I never intend to scale the bids past 30 cents, why do I need to take that one potential campaign and make it divided by 5 and a billion different campaigns when I am not expecting to get impressions on half of them? To me, that just clutters up Campaign Manager. That being said, when you're talking about going through and like figuring out how to isolate and dissect and like launch these things, I do think it makes absolute sense. So I look at it in the case of 2 priorities. I ask myself 2 questions to determine how many keywords. How important is it for me to control ad spend on this target? And how important is it to the strategy, my intended strategy for the campaign, for me to be able to get impressions on this keyword? The more emphatically I answer yes to those 2 questions, the less keywords I'm going to place in the campaign. The more I don't care about those 2 things. So for instance, in the low bid broad match, I don't really care. It's not important to my strategy to get impressions here. And I need to control spend, but I'm kind of controlling spend for this entire, like, I don't need to control spend on each individual target. I'm fine with letting my bids do that. In the case of a very high volume keyword, it is insanely important for me to be able to really specifically get impressions here. And it's actually also very important for me to make sure that I'm controlling budgets here. Because it's a high volume keyword, most likely the spend is going to be quite high. And I need to be able to control the spend. That's the other like non-industry standard thing I have. I see budgets as a way to control spend. I don't believe in ever completely uncapping budgets without any reason. That's the other thing. Because if you have...
Yeah, we do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I've heard, like, oh, make sure the budgets are always wide open and you never run out of budget. And consequently, we have some clients asking us those questions. And I'm like, it's because we don't want your spend to double because you don't... Anyways.
Yeah, especially with clients. Like, yeah. No, I agree. Everything you said so far, I completely agree with it. Yeah. So all that totally makes a lot of sense. A question for you as well. I know, so especially in the community, let's say, we'll call it the community of the PPC community, the ad community, I'm sort of a quiet partner in a way, in a lot of ways. I consume a lot of content on different platforms, just kind of know what's going on, and I'm probably friends with a lot of the same, kind of people in the space. Yeah. It's always an interesting conversation. There's a lot that is agreed upon, and then there's those fringes that are just, die hard, like, no, like this is, so when it comes to kind of segmentation, especially getting more granular, obviously those more kind of important keywords, based on the criteria that you laid out, do you kind of focus more on segmenting, for example, like hyper segmentation, so single keyword campaign, more with exact, or do you also have instances where you've hyper kind of segmented, single keyword phrase or a single keyword broad campaign as well?
That's a good question. So I would say more often than not, it's single keyword exact. There are possible times we might move to phrase, rarely ever with broad. There's always going to be like those weird, interesting tests that you run just to like, oh, I wonder what would happen if, like those kind of things. We're just trying to make something work. But I would say those are like isolated use cases. For the most part, it would be exact match.
Gotcha. Yep. No, that makes sense. I know that's kind of a somewhat common strategy, or becoming more commonplace in the market. And with that as well, like I said, this was the question I was getting to before I went off on my little tangent. But with identifying those especially kind of important keywords, those top keywords, kind of segmenting them out. And have you kind of set different, let's say, targets? It could be ACoS targets or whatever that might be for these segmented out keywords. Like, for example, I know an agency that will, take these keywords, put them into Exact. And for these, they set a higher. So it's like, for example, if their clients like target ACoS is 30%, and let's say 50% comes from these Exact Match campaigns, and then 50% comes from all of these other campaigns, then what they'll do is like set, 40% target, ACoS for these Exact Match, and then 20% for like everything else. And then it kind of like averages out. And their theory for this, or the reasoning, is in order to allocate more budget toward those exact. I know I'm like glowing right now. I look like an angel because the sun just came out.
Yeah.
So I'm super white. But in order to drive kind of the spend that way to where the ACoS remains the same, but ultimately drive more organic ranking through the Exact Match targeting. So it took me a while to get that out. But so with that overall strategy, is that a similar strategy that you use, or I don't know, what are kind of your thoughts on that?
Yes, I do not believe in having singular ACoS targets across the board on everything. The only reason why I don't believe in it is that it oftentimes does not allow you to be competitive in the market. So I'll get questions all the time, like these questions, I love them, God love them. But it's like, the question is, I'm trying to rank for this one specific keyword. And when I put the cost per click needed, what is basically how can I maintain a good ACoS on this keyword that I'm trying to rank for? And my answer is you can't. The market determines what the cost per click will be. I know there are some search pages where we go and try and run top of search and we're like, oh my gosh, it's an $8 bid. Who is paying $8 for this bid? Your competitors. Like I've had some people ask me like, I can't believe somebody's paying it. The market would not be that if someone did not find that placement valuable. Now, are there things you can do if you have, a more, like we said, like a historical back campaign, tend to get better cost per clicks? If, there are certain things, Amazon does take a look at your product. So there's a lot of people like, yeah, but I'm sure the competitors, this marginal difference. Unless you're like completely outside the category and Amazon's like, I don't want to give you this placement, and you have to like jack up your bids to like force their hand because they've determined you're irrelevant for it. There are those fringe cases. But generally speaking, it is the market and the auction that determines the cost per click. If nobody was willing to pay $8, Amazon could not charge $8 for that placement. So your question is not, can I make this one placement work? Because we already established that you can't. Now, you can increase your conversion rate, which means you have less average clicks to make an order, which means your ACoS numbers will be better. So are things, when we're talking about just the ads right here, what can you do in the ads? Jack squat. Couple things. So then your question is twofold. Okay, so how can I, one, make this work? Or two, what do I do about it, right? Because we can't just say like, oh crap, it's the market. Like nothing we can, like you have to do something. You have to run profitable ads. So that's the strategy that you're talking about is, okay, I know that these placements to me are competitive and expensive, but I've still recognized the value on getting my product ranked here. So therefore, I'm going to give a little bit more leeway in my ACoS targets to be able to stomach those cost per clicks that I need to be able to rank here. And there's ways that maybe you can lower bids and maybe you don't get top of search placement, but you get somewhere kind of middle of the page. Does that create enough volume for me to be able to rank on this keyword? Maybe yes, maybe no. Let's test it. Or the other strategy I was talking about, if you're isolating an Exact Match and having it capped with a budget, maybe you can get top of search cost per clicks, but you're capping a budget where you run out halfway through the day. So if you look at things in ratios and pieces of the whole, this one campaign is highly unprofitable. However, because I've restricted the amount of ad spend that I'm putting towards this, as long as my averages work out to be profitable in the ACoS, I can maybe stomach that cost. So it's finding like more creative ways to look at things in parts and pieces, and then rolling it up to look at the averages on the product level and saying, do these numbers work? Which if you're running this kind of strategy, you need to be very transparent to clients, because we've had clients get in, they're like, why are you not taking care of this? We're like, no, we're taking care of it. It's just, we've noted that every time we pull back on this particular keyword, you see a massive effect in your sales volume. And so because we're not trying to decrease your sales, and because we're actually highly profitable from a total ACoS standpoint or an ACoS standpoint on this product line, we've, on this one keyword, we're okay to lose out because we're not losing out on the whole. And it's really important to, again, the overall sales trajectory of the product. So it makes sense. So that was a very long-winded answer of saying, yes, I agree with this strategy.
Yeah. No, that it totally makes sense. Yeah, because I think that's still, and I think it's an older kind of strategy, but that's what I think a lot of sellers are still stuck in. I also get questions kind of varied. Some of them are like Amazon PPC related, but it's very like, yeah, there's a lot of garbage out on the internet about a lot of different topics when it comes to Amazon. I just had someone post in our group about like reviews and still talking about literally today. It was earlier today. I blocked them of, oh yeah, just give away your product for free and get a review and blah, 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 all this stuff. I'm like, man, like that's like, I don't know how many years old that is, but no, it makes a lot of sense. I'm kind of digesting a bit on my end because I had one other question. Oh, here's a question for you. I've been hearing more about this and I haven't done a lot of testing with this yet. But I know, obviously, there's a lot of kind of scaling when it comes to exact match campaigns, ultimately drive organic ranking and all of that. Oh, and just to kind of recap kind of what you said, right? Like what maybe you see is like, okay, we have like a target tacos, let's say of like 14%, let's just say. So it's like 14%. And then let's say beforehand, all of our, for all campaigns and all keywords and all product targets, the target ACoS is 30%. So it's like 30% ACoS, 14% tacos or total advertising cost of sale. So that's like, I don't know, month one. And then month three, you transition to where it's like, all right, for these campaigns, our target is 40%. For these, it's 20 or whatever that might be. And the end result tacos is still 14%. So for example, you see, okay, tacos before 14, tacos today, 14%. But underneath, there's a lot more calculation. And what's the point of all that? Because you have that tacos number, but your total sales have increased, right? At the same kind of profitability of your advertising or the same. So that's kind of recapping or kind of describing at least what I think you're describing a little bit of underneath, being a little bit more meticulous, looking at those keywords that are performing, segmenting those out, treating those a little bit differently, maybe being a little bit more lenient, and ultimately maintaining some of the same important ratios, but then also increasing others and scaling profitably, scaling within the business goals. I know there's and I'll say this as well, I thought this was so cool that I'll share this. I don't know him personally. It's like a friend of a friend, another Amazon seller. So he's unprofitable on Amazon intentionally. He is unprofitable on Amazon directly with his ads and everything, like total. Because on the back end, he has this really powerful insert and it's against TOS 100%. He captures customer data and has he's like comes from the ClickFunnels world and basically applied all of these kind of upsells and downsells to the Amazon world with his inserts. So he captures customer data really well, upsells them on all these other products. And I forget what the metric was. It was like 30% take on his first upsell. And it's like an average of like, I don't know, $49 or $75, I don't know, something like that, to where in total he's profitable, but he's kind of kind of not even looking at the Amazon picture, but then also looking at obviously, of course, his total kind of business picture. And I thought it was fascinating because, like you mentioned, you need to understand your goals. And for him or for someone else to say like, hey, I'm ready to like be unprofitable for 6 months in order to really aggressively increase keyword ranking, reviews. And then after, let's say that 6-month period, knowingly with all this budget that I have, then I'll start focusing on profitability or whatever it might be, to where I think a lot of people kind of think, it's appeal to similarity. Like if I think this way, everyone thinks this way. If I encounter this with my business, it's everyone. Where, it depends on your business goals. And some of those cases maybe aren't normal, but knowing your numbers, number one, and then also knowing your goals. Like, what are you trying, like just, I don't know if you ever ask people to ask you these questions. Like, all right, what are you trying to do? And they're like, well, I'm trying to succeed on Amazon.
That is everything. Like goals are freaking everything. So the way that we look at it is we have goals, and then the goals help you backtrack into strategy. And strategy we determine, and this is another like way, this like blew my mind when I finally figured this out. And I've been trying to preach it everywhere, is look at your account. Now, when you're first starting out, you got one product. So that's your entire account. But as you start launching additional products, look at your products as pieces of a whole. Now, you definitely should be looking at your like individual product metrics. So you don't want to be like, oh, I'm completely losing out on this one versus like that one. But each product, and when I say product, I mean listing, is essentially going to be its own like little microcosm of the marketplace, because they're ranking on different keywords, or you may have somewhat relevant products, but they're going to perform a little bit differently. So my question that I love is looking at the account as pieces of a whole, and I look at it from two ways. One, percentage of total sales volume for each individual product, and then percentage of total ad spend for each individual product. And if you break it down in those ways, I've been able to find some insane things when I'm doing audits. I'm like, dude, this product is bringing in 10% of the total sales, but you're spending 15% of the total ad budget on it. And if you look at the profitability metrics, total ACoS is out of control, ACoS is out of control, and your ad sale percentage is really high. So you're probably actually overspending on this. One report, I looked at that, figured it out. Other products that you look at, you say, okay, so we have about a 15% volume on this one, 15% on, maybe 15% ad spend volumes. Okay, that makes pretty much sense. Okay, now let's look at the performance metrics. Okay, this one's actually performing pretty well within targets. So the other thing you can look at is what is the piece. So you look at it as pieces of a whole. And then you want to look from an ad spend perspective, because if you're trying to control total ACoS numbers, it's ad spend divided by ad sales. So you're looking at these two pieces to try and figure out where you can make the account profitable. And then the question is, what is the performance on that ad spend? So if you have something that is a high contributor to the total ad spend, the more that particular performance on that product is out of line with your overall account goals, the more impact it's going to have on how your overall account is performing. So oftentimes people will say like, okay, I want to scale my account, right? Okay, so I have this one product that's absolutely blowing up on sales. It's my best seller. Makes sense for me to go in and see where can I move the needle on this bestseller. From that isolated standpoint, I would say yes. But my question to you is, what is the impact of the overall spend on this product, and what is the performance on that ad spend? And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll look at the account and say, you know what, your top sales product, although it is, the highest contribution to sales, if we look at the ad performance, you're right at or maybe even slightly over your total ACoS goals. So if you layer on ad spend to this product, because it takes time for organic ranking and everything to catch up, you are going to be most likely impacting an increase in your total ACoS numbers. But if you look further down into the catalog, and this is easier with larger catalogs because you can find these pieces a lot easier, would be I'll look down and I'll say, well, you know what? This product is bringing in 6% of your total sales. You're only spending 4% of your total ad spend on it. And when you look at the performance of the ad spend, you're well below your ACoS target. So even if we increase your spend, and even if that caused an increase on the total ACoS of this product, it's going to have very little impact on your total numbers because you're just bringing it closer. You're already underneath your target. So there's wiggle room here. So if you start looking at it as pieces of a whole and where can I dig in and make that impact, and then you bring it one step down and underneath, say, okay, this is the product that I need to impact. So then when we're looking at it from a scale perspective, we're not looking at it from, I need to scale every single product. The question is, which product do I need to scale? And then I'm taking a look at the ads and doing that more, better, new. Where can I make a direct impact today? Where are there inefficiencies? And then you can also look at this from an efficiency perspective. So if you had a high spending product that was, maybe it's under ACoS or under total ACoS numbers, and you're trying to bring down total ACoS numbers, but even though this one has the highest amount of spend, maybe it's not the highest amount of inefficient spend. So then you're looking at what has greatest impact on the whole from an ad spend perspective, and where are the greatest inefficiencies. And then you would go into those products and say, okay, from an inefficiency standpoint, what am I overspending on? Where do I have clicks with no sales? Because oftentimes if all of great. I mean, like, you should be doing this on a very ongoing basis, and we definitely are. Looking into the account, where am I getting clicks with no sales, decreasing, where do I need to add negative keywords, all of that. But I was doing an analysis on an account where if I looked at it from an ad inefficiency perspective, there was one product that had like 100% ACoS on like a 30% ACoS target for the whole account. Which if you're looking at that, you're going, oh crap, house on fire. Except when I looked at the contribution to the whole and realized it had 0.2% of the total ad spend volume. Even if I brought that product within my targets, doesn't matter whatsoever. I'm saying that's not something we're not constantly optimizing, but if I go in and go, house on fire, where do I need to fix this? Where can I spend all my time? If you're looking at strategy from a priority, what do I prioritize perspective, that's not the right strategy, because that's not my priorities. So my priorities are finding where my highest contribution is to the total ad spend, figuring out which of that has the highest inefficiencies, and then digging into that and spending my priorities there to determine how do I fix the bigger picture, versus like running around like house on fire trying to fix all of the little things in the account, which just takes time and then doesn't always translate to the numbers you want.
No, totally. That I can totally envision that. I use I don't use Excel, but I use Google Sheets all the time. So I'm using it like daily for everything. I have like Google Sheets all linked together and everything. Yeah. I can envision what you're saying of kind of like at a simplistic level. Let's say column A, or let's say column A is your, let's say your product names, your product types, like listed out.
Yeah.
Column B is the percentage of total sales. So over the past 12 months, what percent of sales went to this product, this product, this product. Column C is, percent of ad spend. And then let's just say column D, we'll have one column for this, even though it could be multiple, is let's just say ACoS. And kind of see, so I totally can envision what you're saying of like, oh my gosh, this product, it's 100% ACoS and the target is 30. It's like, but it makes up 0.2%, not even 2%, like 0.2%. So imagine like we get it down to line that we improve total performance by 0.0 whatever percent, like nothing, basically. I mean, very, very small given the effort. And especially when you think about as an entrepreneur, right? People who are kind of setting this up themselves, your dollar per hour, like think about where that's, if I always try to think that, and you never really know. Sometimes you have to throw stuff up the wall and then you figure out what's actually worth your time. But there's sometimes you start figuring out, you're like, if my time, let's say, is worth $100 an hour and it's going to take me an hour to do this, is this better save me, $100 or make me an additional more than $100? And if I don't have a very good likelihood of that, don't do it. It's not even, it's a waste of time, or at least right now, it's definitely a waste. Focusing on those more important, like higher spend, higher. So I'm like literally envisioning a spreadsheet in Google Sheets.
That's what it is. It's literally a spreadsheet. I like to look at the total sales numbers, total ad spend numbers, and then I like to do percentage of totals. I like those two columns. Then I look at it from, I think we have sessions, unit session percentages, and ad conversion rates. I like looking at unit session percentage versus the ad conversion rates, because that tells me most of the time, unless you're targeting things that are very irrelevant, you will most of the time find that your ad conversion rate should be slightly higher at the minimum equivalent to your unit session percentage. If it is lower, then you're either just trying to target some high volume keywords that maybe, you might be pushing specific things, but you should know that because you know what's going on in the account, versus if the ad sale conversion rate is much lower, that's probably a clue that you're not targeting very well. So then that's some clues to look into. And then I look at ACoS, total ACoS, ad, what I call ad sale percentage. I don't know if anyone else calls it that. It's basically the ratio of, you take ad sales divided by total sales, what percentage of my total sales is attributed to ads. So that tells you, like, if I have wild ad spend inefficiencies and like 70% of my total sales come from ads, then I know that I have to be kind of careful with that, and you just kind of look at it from that perspective. And I think those are the main things we look at, maybe also cost per click, just to add some perspective.
Yeah, no, totally. That was actually a super interesting point. I love that. I think we're going to maybe implement that with our accounts. Unit session percentage and then ad conversion rate specifically. And that one of the kind of the ratio, kind of looking at those metrics. Very interesting. No, everything you said like totally makes sense. And it's been great. So I know we've been going quite along now. I have last two questions.
Okay.
Promise. It always, I swear, whenever we bring on someone on the channel, it's almost like always an hour. Like exactly. I don't know what it is. So, but Yeah, it's like the perfect number, but I hope everyone so far has been finding this valuable. Like Elizabeth mentioned, she's got a lot of this content on her channel, so we'll be linking all of her socials and website in the description section. But for the last two questions, so number one, before I went off on my last tangent, was in regards to, kind of scaling and ranking. I've heard this strategy start coming out of sort of like hyper targeting exact match keywords, hyper targeting certain ASINs in order to rank on the frequently bought together section of that product, whether that's for complements. Well, yeah, more for kind of like complementary products. What do you think about that strategy? I don't know if that's something you've even played around with or heard about, or your kind of thoughts on that.
We do product targeting right off the bat, and fun fact, I'm with 98% certainty that we actually got an Amazon Choice badge off of product targeting. Oh, and you know what else was really weird? So I was in a search term report today doing an audit. I actually saw an ASIN show up in an exact match target, which we know we show up on product pages, but now apparently that's showing up. And you know what's super obnoxious is you can't negate ASINs because it's a keyword target. So keep an eye on it.
That's bizarre. Do you think that's, and you don't think that that's erroneous on Amazon's part? You're like, no, I mean, this, like, do you ever look at the report? You're like, okay, like obviously it doesn't really make sense. You're like, okay. Yeah. Or we just don't know. We'll find out if it keeps happening.
So my thing is, they've always had product page placement in keyword targets. We've always kind of wondered, but to my knowledge, it hadn't showed up in search term reports before. I'm trying to think back if it ever has, and I don't think I've seen it. And it was just today that I saw it. But they're doing some interesting changes with how their match types function recently. So I would just say for everyone listening, keep a very sharp eye on all your search term reports going forward, because you might start to see more of these kind of weird things pop up.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'm going to start looking at, I haven't seen that at all in any of our reports, like an ASIN search.
It was just today. It was in the search term tab, which is where I saw it.
Because it would be interesting, because obviously there's the, when you target, like obviously, product targeting, you can appear obviously on that product page, and then also in keywords that keyword is it keywords that they're bidding on, that they're ranking for, kind of a mix, like keywords that are...
In this case, I think they were targeting a brand name, and that one of the branded products showed up in the search term report is how it appeared. Remains to be seen how it's going to go going forward, but... Yeah,
there you go. Like I said, you heard it here first. So now leads us to our last question. This has been fantastic. But Elizabeth, is there anything you want to share? Anything that's on your chest you want to kind of get off on? You get so many questions about Amazon PPC. You want to leave one thing with people like that you think would be valuable that we haven't covered yet?
Okay, here's one that again is kind of going in the face of a lot of the conventional Amazon advertising understanding. Is that ranking does not equal sales. Sales equals sales. Ranking is as a means to an end, but it is not the only thing that determines sales volume. Now, I'm not saying throw ranking out the window. I'm not saying, like, don't ever run ranking campaigns. We're still going to continuously run ranking campaigns. But there are certain things that are impacted, such as your BSR ranking. It is strictly a sales volume game. It's not a ranking game. And the only reason why I'd been thinking about this for a while, and I had like this oh my gosh moment when one of our account managers made some changes to help us get the bestseller badge and got it back within 3 days with less than a point increase in the total ACoS numbers. And I asked her, like, what the heck did you do? And she's like, I just prioritized anything that was making sales that was within targets, regardless of what it was. And she massively increased the sales volume at profitable levels and got the bestseller badge. So there are certain niches where ranking on specific keywords is absolutely necessary, because those specific keywords are where all of the search volume is concentrated. So ranking is not... So I'm trying to challenge this perspective. I'm not saying ranking is not valuable or necessary. I'm just saying ranking does not necessarily equal sales. It equals ranking equals traffic, and traffic equals sales. Traffic multiplied by conversion rate equals the amount of sales volume. So it's important from a traffic perspective, but I think a lot of times sellers will get so hung up in I must rank for this high volume keyword, and they sacrifice massive profitability to do so, and try and do things that in long term are just not sustainable for the business because they have this, if I do not rank, I will not make sales. And that is sometimes true, but it's not always true. So I would challenge people who are listening to this just to take a step back and think, my goal is sales from a profit perspective. What can I afford to spend to generate those sales? And then try and take a look at your ads with that fresh eye and see if there's places that you can increase your sales volume without having to give up profits. It's not always going to be there, but oftentimes if you kind of get off the must rank like fear treadmill, you can find some really interesting solutions that you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Yep. No, I agree 100%. It totally makes sense. Exactly that, like, because I do see that a lot of just this. First of all, this hyper focus on ranking, which can change based on geographic location, changes by the day, But exactly, like, sales are sales. So if your ultimate goal is ranking, like, that's all we care about. It's like, so you're cool with just ranking page 1 for these keywords and never making a sale, right? You're cool with that. It's like, no, we want sale. Well, then there you go. Then optimize, which totally makes sense to everything you set up to this point, bringing up, looking at like, total sales, percentage of sales, looking at those, especially those keywords, makes a lot of sense. And I've noticed this as well. I mean, a lot of these different keyword tools, I'm not sure what you use. We use Helium 10, like, in general for a lot of just general keyword research, rank tracking, all that kind of stuff. And it's a great tool. I love Helium 10. But it's a lot of estimates. I remember for one of this is just one random example. I know there's many, and I'm sure you've seen this, but in one of our campaigns, we pulled out this keyword that was generating, I think on average over the past 6 months, it was like 12 sales per month for this one keyword. And Helium 10 registered zero monthly searches for this keyword, which obviously is not true. And we can look at the impressions for it and everything. But it's just an example, like, not shocking. It's just like, take it with a grain of salt. So if you're using a tool, like, here's my most important keywords based on what the tool says, and here's my ranking based on what the tool says. And then you're looking at your own data and seeing that it's not quite moving the needle. It's like, so kind of like diving into your own data. So everything you said to this point, like, there's not a single thing I think I've disagreed with. So
that's good. Really, I try not to ruffle too many feathers.
You won't ruffle. I'm always like, I don't know why. I just don't. I guess because I don't really, identify like I'm the it's like PPC expert or whatever. So I don't. Maybe if I did, then I would get a little bit more. But none of this stuff. Any kind of ranking, SEO strategies, product selection and development. I don't know. I never I'm always open to even completely changing, if I feel that it would be better, obviously with some testing and things like that. But this is, like I said, for somehow it always ends at exactly 1 hour. This has been fantastic. I've learned a bunch. I hope everyone who's watching that you've learned a bunch. Like I said, you could find, actually, Elizabeth, what's the best place for people with all of their questions to just pour on you? I'm just kidding. People who want to learn more,
oh my goodness,
maybe have questions.
I have a solution for the questions. So I love answering people's questions in Amazon advertising. So I actually created a form, and I can give you the link, where if you have an Amazon advertising question, you can submit it, and I'm going to attempt to answer one of those questions 5 days a week if I can.
Oh, awesome. That's great. I'm gonna send 5 questions a week now, moving forward.
There you go.
I'm just kidding. Summer.
I might not get to all of them, but I'll try.
Yep, that's a great. Something that I used to promise that on a lot of my socials. Oh, I'll answer your questions back when I was smaller, and now that we're kind of growing, I'm like, I'm not answering to, I'm trying to, but I'm at the point. As Alex Hormozi mentioned this, he's like, I don't respond to anything. We can't he wouldn't be able to do anything else but respond to messages. So anyway. Yeah, we'll get that form from you. Yeah, we'll have the link to that form that you can directly get some guidance from Elizabeth herself. Great YouTube channel. That's actually how we ended up connecting for this video. I've watched her content. It's fantastic. I'm going to keep watching it. So you guys should subscribe to that as well. And we'll include a link to your website, your agency, Jungler. We'll have a link to that as well for those interested in potentially, hiring you, taking you on in your services. But Elizabeth, this has been really fantastic. I'm really glad that you took the time out and shared all of your kind of gold nuggets with us. So thank you for coming on.
No, definitely. It was great. I really appreciate coming on.
Awesome.